Aurora Bennett, 35, was seen as the perfect wife. With her enchanting smile and natural elegance, she seemed to have the life many envied. A solid marriage to Oliver, a successful and caring businessman. They had been together for 10 years, building a story that appeared unshakable. Yet, within her, a void had begun to grow. Aurora couldn't pinpoint exactly when this feeling had taken root, but she knew something was missing. Oliver, although devoted, was often consumed by work. His nights were frequently filled with meetings, and his mornings with endless phone calls. Aurora, who had left her career in graphic design to support her husband and take care of their home, started feeling invisible. It was as if she had become just another part of the comfortable backdrop he had built, no longer the center of his attention. It was in this context that Darren Wallace appeared. He was a co-worker on a temporary project Aurora had taken on to keep herself busy. Darren was the opposite of Oliver. Spontaneous, fun, and full of compliments Aurora hadn't heard in years. During a trip to Chicago to present the company's project, a connection began to form. Between dinners and conversations at the hotel, the professional setting gave way to something more personal. One night, after a few glasses of wine, Darren confessed his admiration for Aurora. He praised not just her appearance but also her intelligence and sensitivity, qualities she felt had gone unnoticed in her marriage. Aurora tried to resist. She thought of Oliver and everything they had built, but in that moment of vulnerability, the feeling of being desired again overwhelmed her. A shared glance turned into something more. Aurora gave in. The next morning, Aurora woke up consumed by guilt. Darren, on the other hand, seemed indifferent, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. It was at that moment she realized what she had done and the potential consequences. She decided she would never tell Oliver. She would bury that moment as a one-time mistake and never let anything like it happen again. She returned home determined to move on with her life, but something had changed. The weight of her secret was suffocating. Aurora began avoiding direct contact with Oliver, afraid he might sense her guilt. At the same time, she felt a strange mix of regret and longing for the emotions Darren had stirred in her. It was an internal conflict that was just beginning to unfold. Oliver Bennett had always been a methodical man. He believed that the foundation of any relationship was trust, and until now, he had never had a reason to doubt Aurora. However, in recent months, something seemed off. The sparkle in Aurora's eyes had faded, and she seemed more distant, distracted, almost absent. He noticed that the evenings when Aurora used to eagerly wait for his return had been replaced by vague excuses and an uncomfortable silence. One evening, during dinner, Oliver tried to start a conversation, but Aurora seemed disengaged, pushing her food around without actually eating. He asked if something was wrong, and she replied with a forced smile, "Just tired." The project has been intense. Oliver knew Aurora worked hard, but this felt deeper. His instincts told him there was something she wasn't sharing. He began paying closer attention. He noticed Aurora spending more time on her phone, sometimes smiling to herself as she typed messages. When he asked about it, she said it was work-related. The meticulous man that Oliver was, he began connecting the dots but avoided jumping to conclusions. He needed something more concrete before confronting her. The following weekend, while tidying up the house, Oliver found something unsettling: a hotel receipt. It wasn't unusual for Aurora to travel for company events, but this receipt didn't match any of the recent trips she had mentioned. He stared at the paper for long minutes, his chest tightening, but decided to keep quiet. Over the next few days, Oliver watched Aurora more closely. He noticed how she avoided his gaze and grew tense whenever he approached her phone or belongings. It was as if she was hiding something, but he still didn't know what. One evening, while they were watching a movie, Aurora received a notification on her phone and quickly turned the device face down. It was a subtle gesture, but for Oliver, it was a wake-up call. He knew something was going on. He decided he needed to uncover the truth but didn't want to confront her without evidence. Instead, he preferred to observe, giving her the chance to come clean before taking action. Doubt began to eat away at Oliver. He still loved Aurora deeply and didn't want to believe she could be hiding something so serious. However, her behavior, once spontaneous and light-hearted, now seemed carefully calculated. It was as if she had built an invisible wall between them. Oliver felt that their marriage was changing, and for the first time, he had no control over the situation. Aurora knew she had to be cautious. From the moment she decided to bury her mistake with Darren, she vowed never to leave any trace. However, even the most carefully laid plans can falter. One ordinary morning, while Oliver was organizing some documents in the home office, he found a small crumpled note beneath a pile of papers. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, but its words carried a weight he couldn't ignore. The note read, "Aurora, I can't wait to see you again. You make me feel alive. Darren." For a moment, Oliver thought he had misread. He read the note again, hoping his mind was playing tricks on him. But there was no doubt. He held the piece of paper with trembling hands, as a hollow sensation settled in his chest. Oliver decided to keep the note without mentioning it to Aurora. He needed time to process what he had found. He spent the rest of the day in silence, watching Aurora with new eyes, trying to find any trace of guilt or evidence that she might be living a double life. But Aurora, unaware of the note, behaved as usual, maintaining an air of normalcy that only deepened Oliver's confusion. That night, while Aurora slept, Oliver sat on the couch in the living room, lost in thought. He recalled all the moments they had shared, the promises they had made to each other, and felt a tightness in his chest at the thought that it all might have been destroyed. He wanted to confront her, demand answers, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the fear of hearing a truth he wasn't ready to face. Or maybe he still had hoped that there was an explanation that didn't involve betrayal. In the days that followed, Oliver began to withdraw into himself. He avoided deep conversations with Aurora, responded with monosyllables, and spent more time away from home, either at the office or with friends. Aurora, in turn, began to notice the change in Oliver. She asked if something was wrong, but he deflected, saying he was just overwhelmed with work. However, Oliver couldn't ignore the note for long. He knew he needed more than a piece of paper to confront Aurora. He decided to observe her every move, waiting for something that would either confirm or refute his suspicions. Despite all the pain he felt, he still wished he was wrong. The note had become an unbearable burden for Oliver. Despite his attempts to remain calm and gather evidence before confronting Aurora, doubt gnawed at his mind. Every gesture she made, every word she said, seemed to carry a hidden meaning. He knew he could no longer avoid it. It was time to face the truth. One night, during dinner, Oliver sat in silence, watching Aurora. She was talking about her day at work, but he barely listened. His eyes were fixed on her, analyzing every movement, searching for answers that might never come spontaneously. When Aurora finally noticed Oliver's piercing gaze, she stopped talking and hesitantly asked, "What is it? Is everything okay?" Oliver took a deep breath, trying to contain the anger and disgust he felt. He pulled the note out of his pocket and placed it on the table, sliding it toward Aurora. The sound of the paper breaking the silence in the room was almost deafening. "Explain this." His voice was low but laden with pain. Aurora looked at the note, and shock spread across her face. For a moment, she couldn't say anything. Her heart raced, and her hands began to tremble. She knew this moment would come but had never prepared herself to face it. "Oliver, I can explain." Her voice faltered. "Then explain." He crossed his arms, waiting for an answer that might make sense. Aurora tried to find the right words, but everything felt hollow. Finally, she admitted, "It was a mistake. I got involved with someone, but it was a moment of weakness. I regretted it the instant it happened, and I've never spoken to him again." Aurora's words felt like daggers in Oliver's heart. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. When he finally opened his eyes, they were filled with tears he refused to let fall. "Why, Aurora? What did I do to deserve this?" Aurora felt the tears streaming down her face. She tried to move closer, but Oliver stepped back. "It wasn't because of you. It was me. I felt lost, invisible. I don't know how it happened, but I never wanted to hurt you." Her voice was a broken whisper. Oliver stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound. He looked at Aurora, now sobbing, and said with a coldness she had never heard before, "You destroyed everything, Aurora. Everything." Without another word, Oliver grabbed his car keys and left the house, leaving Aurora alone at the table. The silence that followed was suffocating. She knew she had hurt the man she loved most and that she might never be able to fix it. After the confrontation, the Bennett's home became a place of emptiness. Oliver didn't return home that night. Aurora spent hours sitting at the dining table, staring at the note that seemed to be the tangible proof of everything she had destroyed. Every minute without news from Oliver made her guilt weigh even heavier. The next morning, Oliver returned briefly. He entered quietly, grabbed some clothes and documents, and avoided any eye contact with Aurora. She called out to him, her voice trembling. "Oliver, can we talk?" He paused for a moment but didn't turn around. "Not now, Aurora. I need time." His voice was low, almost lifeless. Oliver left again, leaving Aurora alone with the echo of his words. He went to Elias's house, his best friend and confidant. Elias, though surprised by the story, offered unconditional support without judgment. "You don't have to decide anything right now, Oliver. Take a breath. Just give yourself the time you need to figure out what you really want," Elias said as he poured him a cup of coffee. Meanwhile, Aurora spiraled into regret. She tried calling Oliver several times, but all the calls went to voicemail. She wrote messages apologizing, but none were answered. In the solitude of the house, she began replaying memories of when their love seemed unbreakable. Each memory felt like a stab, a painful reminder of what she had put at risk. Oliver, on the other hand, was fighting an internal battle. He still loved Aurora, but the betrayal was a deep wound. During his nights at Elias's house, he wondered if it was possible to rebuild something that had been broken so completely. Elias, always careful, avoided giving direct advice but encouraged Oliver to follow both his heart and reason. The silence between them became almost unbearable. Aurora spent her days trying to fill Oliver's absence with household chores, but every corner of the house seemed to carry his presence. The bed felt larger, the silence louder. She knew he needed time, but the fear that he might never love her again consumed her. Oliver, in turn, began writing his thoughts in a notebook. It was the only way he could process the pain he felt without being overwhelmed by it. He jotted down questions he couldn't get out of his mind. Asterisk, why did she do it? Can I trust her again? Do I love Aurora enough to forgive her? Asterisk, the answers didn't come easily, but putting his feelings on paper helped him face reality. At the end of that week, Elias asked, "Do you want to work this out, Oliver? Or do you think it's better to move on alone?" Oliver looked at his friend, his expression heavy with uncertainty. "I still don't know. All I know is that nothing will ever be the same again." While Oliver wrestled with his pain and Aurora sank into regret, Darren Wallace, the man Aurora had cheated with, decided to reappear. Aurora had cut all contact with him right after the incident, but Darren wasn't the kind of man to be ignored easily. He was ambitious, manipulative, and unwilling to accept rejection. One rainy afternoon, as Aurora finished preparing dinner in her quiet kitchen, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered, thinking it might be work-related. The voice on the other end froze her in place. "Aurora, it's been a while since we last talked." Aurora's heart raced. It was Darren. "Darren, what do you want?" she asked, trying to stay calm, but her voice betrayed her nerves. "I want to see you. We have unfinished business." His voice was controlled, almost cold. "We have nothing left to talk about. This is over, Darren. Do you really think you can just pretend nothing happened? I have something that could completely change your life, Aurora. I'm sure your husband would love to know more details about what happened between us." Aurora felt the ground beneath her shift. Darren was threatening to expose everything. "You wouldn't do that. You know me well enough to know I would. I'm giving you a chance to resolve this with me before things get uncomfortable." Aurora hung up the phone, her hands shaking. She felt cornered. She didn't know what Darren really had, but the threat was clear. She spent the rest of the night trying to think of a solution, but no idea seemed viable. Telling Oliver the complete truth was an option, but one she wasn't sure he could handle. Ignoring Darren, however, seemed far too risky. Across the city, Darren was beginning to devise a plan. He wanted more than just to confront Aurora. He wanted to manipulate her into coming back to him, using the threat as a weapon. Darren was cunning, and he knew that if he played his cards right, he could turn the situation to his advantage. The next morning, Aurora received an email. It was a photo of her and Darren in Chicago, together in the hotel lobby. The email's subject line read, "Reconsider my offer." Aurora felt the blood drain from her face. Darren was playing dirty. Her entire day was consumed by cycles of despair and fear. Aurora decided she needed to face Darren in person. That night, She drove to the bar he mentioned in the email, determined to put an end to this. When she arrived, Darren was waiting with a confident smile. "I knew you'd come." Aurora sat at the table, her eyes locked on his. "What do you want, Darren? Just say it. Simple. I want you to come back to me, or your husband will know every detail of our connection." Aurora took a deep breath, trying to contain her panic. She knew she was dealing with a manipulator and that any wrong move could make the situation even worse. Aurora felt the weight of Darren's gaze as he waited for her response. Every word he spoke was carefully calculated, and she knew she was treading on dangerous ground. The bar, with its dim lighting and murmurs of conversation in the background, seemed like the perfect setting for a game of manipulation, and Darren was clearly in control. "I'll never go back to you," Aurora finally said, her voice firm, though her breathing betrayed her nerves. "Aurora," Darren replied, a cold smile spreading across his face. "You've always been stubborn, but I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation." He leaned across the table, bringing his face closer to hers. "I don't want to hurt you yet, but if you don't cooperate, I'll make sure Oliver knows every detail of our story. And if that's not enough, I'm sure he'd be interested in seeing some of our conversations and photos." Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea Darren had kept anything. He was playing dirty, and the sense of being cornered made her feel even more vulnerable. "Darren, this won't end well for you," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Darren laughed, leaning back in his chair. "The only person who stands to lose here is you. Think carefully, Aurora. I have nothing to lose." Aurora knew she needed time to figure a way out. Any impulsive action could make things worse. "Give me some time to think," she said, trying to buy herself time. "I'll give you 1 day," Darren replied, a hint of menace in his tone. "But after that, if you don't come back to me, Oliver will know everything. The choice is yours." Aurora left the bar with her heart racing. That night, she couldn't sleep. She thought through all the possibilities, but none seemed safe. Telling Oliver the full truth now could be devastating, but letting Darren continue his threats was even worse. The next day, Aurora made a decision. She had to face Oliver again. He was the only person who could help her get out of this situation. By evening, when Oliver came to the house to pick up more of his belongings, Aurora was waiting for him, her eyes swollen from crying. "Oliver, please, I need to talk to you. It's important." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable being in the same room as her. "Say what you need to say, Aurora. I don't have much time." Aurora took a deep breath, holding back tears. "Darren is threatening me. He has photos, messages, and he's planning to use them to destroy any chance we might have to rebuild." Oliver stayed silent, his eyes fixed on hers, trying to decipher whether this was another manipulation or the truth. "And what do you expect me to do?" he finally asked, his voice cold but with a hint of curiosity. "I need your help, Oliver. I can't handle this alone." The tension in the room was palpable. Oliver knew he was still hurt, but at the same time, his instinct to protect Aurora, despite everything, was still there. He took a deep breath, letting the silence fill the space before responding. "I'll think about what to do. But no, this doesn't change what you've done." Aurora nodded, knowing that any hope for reconciliation was still far away. The only certainty was that they needed to deal with Darren before he caused even more damage to their lives. After hearing Aurora, Oliver left the house without saying another word, but the turmoil in his mind was evident. He drove aimlessly through the city streets, trying to organize his thoughts. He was still deeply hurt, but Darren's threat was something he couldn't ignore. Despite everything, part of him felt the need to protect Aurora, maybe out of love, or perhaps out of a sense of responsibility he still carried. While Oliver processed the situation, Aurora stayed home alone, wondering if he would come back or abandon her for good. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. She knew asking Oliver for help was her only option, but she feared it might push him even further away. Hours later, Oliver showed up at Elias's house. He told his friend everything, including Darren's threat. Elias, ever rational, listened carefully before saying, "If he's blackmailing Aurora, this isn't just about you and her anymore. This is a bigger problem. You need to act before this guy causes even more damage." Oliver nodded slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility. He knew he had to act but was still wrestling with his own emotions. After reflecting for some time, he decided he would confront Darren, but on his own terms. The next morning, Oliver returned home and found Aurora waiting for him, her eyes hollow from exhaustion and worry. "I've thought a lot about what you said," he began bluntly. "And I'm going to deal with Darren. But let me make it clear, this doesn't mean everything is okay between us. I'm doing this because he's not going to destroy what's left of my life." Aurora nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew the path to forgiveness was still a long one, but hearing Oliver take control of the situation gave her a small glimmer of hope that maybe they still had a chance. That afternoon, Oliver met Darren at a cafe, in a meeting he arranged via text. Darren arrived with a smug smile, clearly believing he was in control. "Oliver, what a surprise! What can I do for you?" Oliver remained calm, his eyes fixed on Darren. "We both know why we're here. I want you to stop threatening my wife. This ends now." Darren laughed, leaning back casually in his chair. "Your wife, huh? Interesting that you still call her that after everything. But what exactly do you think you can do to stop me?" Oliver kept his composure, but his voice took on a firmer tone. "You're not going to destroy what's left of my life. If you release anything, rest assured, I'll come after you with everything I have. And trust me, Darren, I have more resources than you can imagine." Darren's expression shifted slightly, but he tried to maintain control. "Are you threatening me, Oliver? I thought you were smarter than that." Oliver smiled coldly. "It's not a threat. It's a promise. And if you're smart, you'll realize you're playing with fire." Darren was silent for a moment, clearly weighing his options. He knew Oliver wasn't an ordinary man and that taking the blackmail further could have serious consequences. "Fine," Darren finally said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I just wanted what was mine, but I guess this isn't going to work. Consider this over." Oliver didn't respond. He simply stood up, cast Darren one final look, and left the cafe, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. After facing Darren, Oliver returned home. It was late at night, and the house was enveloped in silence. Aurora was in the living room, waiting for him. As soon as she heard the door open, she stood up immediately, nervous, unsure of how he would react after the meeting. Oliver walked in, his expression unreadable. He placed his keys on the table and looked at Aurora for a long moment before saying, "It's done. Darren won't bother you anymore." Aurora let out a sigh of relief, but Oliver's distant gaze unsettled her. "Thank you, Oliver." I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head slowly and walked to the couch, sitting heavily, as if the weight of everything was crushing him. "It's not about thanking me, Aurora. This doesn't fix anything between us." Aurora approached hesitantly, sitting on the edge of the armchair next to him. I know what I did was unforgivable. But, can you at least tell me what you're thinking? I can't stand this silence." Oliver rubbed his hands over his face, trying to organize his thoughts. Finally, he looked at Aurora, his expression laden with pain. "I'm thinking about how I got here. How the woman I loved for so long could betray me. I'm trying to understand if I can even look at you without feeling this." Aurora lowered her head, tears silently streaming down her face. "I know I hurt you in a way that may never be repaired. But I still love you, Oliver. I don't know how to prove it, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes for you to forgive me." Oliver was silent for a few moments, the tension between them filling the room. "Love isn't enough, Aurora. Trust is the foundation of everything, and you broke that. I don't know if I can forgive you. Not now. Maybe not ever." Those words felt like knives to Aurora, but she knew he was being honest. She couldn't expect immediate forgiveness. It was something she would have to earn if he ever gave her the chance. They sat in silence, side by side, for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Oliver stood up, grabbed his jacket, and said, "I'm staying somewhere else tonight. I need time to think." Aurora tried to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She simply watched him leave, feeling as though the emptiness around her was growing even larger. The days that followed were silent and heavy with tension. Oliver had decided to stay in a small hotel in town while processing his feelings and figuring out what to do with his life. Aurora remained alone in the house, immersed in an empty routine, trying to cope with the guilt that consumed her. Oliver, in turn, buried himself in work as a way to distract his mind from the pain. He spent long hours at the office, but during every break, his thoughts inevitably drifted back to Aurora. Despite his hurt, he couldn't help but wonder if there was still something worth salvaging between them. Determined to show her remorse and willingness to change, Aurora wrote a letter to Oliver. She knew that, even if he wasn't ready to speak to her, he might at least read her words. The letter was sincere, painful, and filled with confessions about how she had lost herself and how much she still loved him. She gave it to Elias, asking him to deliver it to Oliver when he thought the time was right. Elias, loyal to Oliver, hesitated before accepting the letter. He knew his friend was deeply hurt, but he also sensed there were still feelings between them. That night, Elias handed the letter to Oliver. "She asked me to give you this. You decide what to do with it." Oliver held the letter for some time before opening it. As he read, he felt a mix of anger, sadness, and something he didn't want to admit: hope. Aurora wrote about her mistakes, her regrets, and her desire, above all else, to rebuild what they had lost. The next day, Oliver made a decision. He still needed clarity, but he knew avoiding Aurora wouldn't solve anything. So, he returned home to confront her again, this time with the goal of understanding if there was truly something left to rebuild. When Aurora saw him walk through the door, she was surprised. She hadn't expected to see him so soon. "Oliver," she began hesitantly, "I didn't think I'd see you today." "I read your letter," he responded directly, his expression serious. "And I'm here because I think we need to put everything on the table. No excuses, no omissions. The whole truth." Aurora felt her chest tighten, but she nodded. "You deserve the truth. Ask me anything, and I'll answer." The conversation was long and painful. Oliver asked questions that made her uncomfortable, but she answered them all honestly, even when some answers were difficult to hear. He needed to understand what had led her to betray him, and she needed to prove she was willing to face the consequences of her actions. By the end of the conversation, they were both emotionally drained. Oliver didn't give any guarantees of forgiveness or reconciliation, but Aurora sensed he was at least open to considering the possibility of a future together, no matter how distant it seemed. "I still don't know what I want, Aurora," Oliver said before leaving the room. "But at least now I know the truth." Aurora nodded, knowing this was just the beginning of a long road to try to rebuild Oliver's trust. After the honest conversation between Oliver and Aurora, the tension in the house remained, but something had shifted. The pain was still there, but Aurora's sincerity had planted a seed of possibility. Both knew the path ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, there was a chance, however small. Oliver decided to set some conditions for any attempt at rebuilding their relationship. He presented them clearly, without hesitation. "If you really want to try, Aurora, it has to be on my terms. I want total transparency. No secrets, no omissions. And we need professional help. We won't make it on our own." Aurora agreed without hesitation. She knew she wasn't in a position to negotiate and that everything he asked for was necessary. "I'll do whatever it takes, Oliver. Just don't give up on us." The first step was booking a session with a couples therapist. Oliver insisted it be a neutral space where they could express their feelings and try to find a way forward together. Aurora was nervous but relieved that Oliver was willing to take even a small step, even if it came with no promises. In the first session, the therapist, Dr. Morgan, asked both of them to share how they were feeling. Oliver spoke first. "I'm angry. I feel like everything I believed in was destroyed. But at the same time, I still feel something for her. And that's what angers me the most. I can't just leave it all behind." Aurora listened in silence, her hands clenched in her lap. When it was her turn, she was honest. "I lost myself. 4 years, I felt like I wasn't enough anymore, like I had become invisible. But that's no excuse for what I did. I want to rebuild this because I still love you, Oliver. And I'm willing to face anything to have a chance to recover what we lost." The session was emotionally exhausting but opened a line of communication between them that had been lost for a long time. Dr. Morgan advised them to take small steps, not to expect quick changes, but to commit to working on their relationship, day by day. In the days that followed, Oliver and Aurora began implementing small changes. Aurora made a point of showing her transparency, sharing details of her day, her messages, and even her most intimate thoughts with Oliver. He, in turn, tried to keep an open mind, though it was still difficult for him to trust completely. One evening, as they were having dinner together, Oliver looked at Aurora and said, I still don't know where this is going. But today was a little easier than yesterday. Aurora smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me now. Just the fact that you're here with me means more than you can imagine. The moment was brief but marked the first sign that something was changing. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, they both felt they were walking in the same direction. Months had passed since Oliver and Aurora began therapy and their attempts at rebuilding their relationship. Progress was slow and filled with ups and downs, but both were committed to trying. Despite his doubts, Oliver began to notice small, genuine changes in Aurora. On the other hand, Aurora felt that every step toward Oliver's forgiveness was a victory, even though he still kept some emotional distance. One quiet evening, Oliver surprised Aurora by suggesting they go out to dinner. It was something they hadn't done in months, and Aurora readily accepted, feeling that perhaps it was a sign he was willing to take another step forward. They went to a modest restaurant they used to visit during the early years of their marriage. During dinner, the atmosphere was tense, but less so than before. In a moment of courage, Aurora said, I know this doesn't erase what happened, but I want to thank you for not giving up on us. I know we're far from what we used to be, but I'm willing to fight for this every single day. Oliver was silent for a moment before responding. I'm not doing this just for you, Aurora. I'm doing it because part of me believes we can be better. But I won't lie. It still hurts. And maybe that pain will never fully go away. Aurora nodded, understanding that complete forgiveness was something only time could bring, if it came at all. But that night felt like a small step forward, a moment where they both allowed themselves to dream of a better future. As the months passed, Oliver began to let his guard down, slowly. He still had difficult days, moments when the memory of the betrayal resurfaced, but he realized Aurora was making a genuine effort to be honest and present in a way he hadn't seen in years. He began to see that the hard work and shared pain were building a new foundation, different, but perhaps stronger than before. One day, as they walked through the park, Oliver held Aurora's hand for the first time in months. She looked at him, surprised, and he simply smiled, saying, Maybe we can try something new. Not go back to what we were, but build something different. Something that works for us now. Aurora felt tears streaming down her face, but this time, they were tears of hope. She knew the path wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to move forward, step by step, alongside Oliver. As Oliver and Aurora continued trying to rebuild their relationship, the days felt lighter, but challenges remained constant. Both knew the past couldn't be erased, but they were learning to live with it in a healthier way. Every small gesture, every honest conversation, seemed to pave the way for something new. During a session with their therapist, Dr. Morgan proposed an exercise that would further challenge the couple. I want you to dedicate a week to writing a letter to each other. Not just about the past, but about what you hope for in your future together. Be honest and vulnerable. Aurora threw herself into the task immediately. She wanted Oliver to see how much she had changed, how the mistake had transformed her. She wrote about her fears, her guilt, but also the love she still felt for him and her desire to build something new, something stronger. Oliver, on the other hand, hesitated. For him, opening up again was painful, but he knew it was a necessary step. He wrote about his doubts, his struggle to trust, but also about the recent moments when he felt a spark of hope. He admitted that, despite everything, there was still love, a wounded love, but not a destroyed one. When the day came to exchange letters, both were nervous. They sat face to face in the therapy room and began to read. The words were filled with emotion, tears streaming as they shared their deepest feelings. It was in that moment they both realized something essential. It wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about rebuilding together. That night, at home, Oliver suggested something unexpected. Why don't we do something we've never done before? Something just for us. Aurora smiled, curious. Like what? Let's plan a trip. Just the two of us. Somewhere new, where we can create memories that aren't tied to the past. Aurora immediately agreed. The idea of creating something new, far from the echoes of the betrayal, felt like an important step. They spent weeks planning every detail, choosing a small coastal village where they could disconnect from the world and focus solely on each other. During the trip, they allowed themselves to relax for the first time in months. Without the pressure of routine or painful memories, they began rediscovering the little things that connected them. Oliver's humor, Aurora's attentive gaze, and the simplicity of being together. One night, as they walked along the beach, Aurora stopped and looked at Oliver. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I know it hasn't been easy." Oliver held her hand and responded with a sincere tone. "It's still not easy, but I think I'm starting to see what we can be, if we keep trying." In that moment, under the stars, they both felt they were finally moving toward a future where love could bloom again. The trip marked a turning point for Oliver and Aurora. Back in their routine, they began implementing small changes that reflected their renewed commitment. Oliver still had moments of hesitation, but Aurora's consistent actions, her transparency, and her patience slowly started to rebuild his trust. One morning, as they had breakfast together, Oliver looked at Aurora with a serious expression, though it carried less pain than before. "I think we can try something. I don't know what it'll look like, but I'm willing to take a step forward. With you." Aurora, tears welling in her eyes, held his hand across the table. "That's all I need, Oliver. Let's rebuild this together." They agreed to move forward practically and realistically. They decided to continue therapy sessions, but also introduced intentional moments of lightness into their routine. They reserved nights for simple dinners, walks, and conversations without pressure. Every moment together became a brick in the rebuilding of what they had lost. One day, while sorting through an old box of photos from the early days of their marriage, Oliver found a letter Aurora had written for him on their first wedding anniversary. He read it silently, and when he finished, he turned to Aurora. "These words, they're what I want to feel again. I'm not there yet, but I think I'm closer than before." Aurora smiled, touched by his words. "I believe we'll get there. One step at a time." Over time, small gestures transformed into a more solid foundation. Oliver began to make room for emotional intimacy again. Aurora, in turn, remained committed to never repeating the mistakes of the past, demonstrating daily that their love was still her priority. The major milestone of this new phase came during a dinner with friends. For months, they had avoided social events together, but they decided it was time to show the world they were starting anew. Seated at the table, surrounded by friends who noticed the change in the couple, Oliver held Aurora's hand and looked at her with a subtle smile. "Thank you for never giving up," he whispered. Aurora felt the warmth of his words and squeezed his hand in response. At that moment, she realized that, although the journey had been painful and uncertain, they had found a new way to love, one that was more conscious and stronger. Oliver and Aurora's story didn't end with a happily ever after, but with a "we'll keep trying every day." Their love, now marked by scars, was also a more resilient love, one that had faced the worst and chosen to survive. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel and press the like button. Thank you.